if you can hear me, Andy, you
Yeah,
might introduce yourself and let us know what your position is in Kansas City, and tell us how things are going, and then get into your presentation.
sure. So, yeah, my name is Andy Savastino. I am the Chief Environmental Officer with the City of Kansas City, Missouri, within the Office of Environmental Quality, which is a division of the City Manager's Office. Been with the city just about 30 years now. Been with the Environmental Office since it was created in 1994-ish, I think it was. So, yeah, we're just the office was originally set up into the regulatory compliance realm, and then over the years kind of transitioned into sustainability. And of course, our focus as of the past few years is climate protection and resilience. And one of the things I was asked to speak to you all today was about our climate protection resilience plan. So kind of do that. The environmental office, just for everybody to know, is a fairly small office within the city. We've got 8 staff folks currently. Half of those are working on sustainability, climate action. The other half kind of still take care of regulatory compliance for the city. So it's a big lift. The climate plan, it was recently adopted in August. So there's a lot to it. And what I did today for you all is kind of put together a presentation. And actually, this will be the second presentation I've given on this. Hopefully I've captured what you're looking for in this today. Just let me know if you have any feedbacks, or send me emails. We're always trying to make this presentation a little bit better as we kind of help promote the plan in this particular area with various partners and stakeholders and groups. So certainly looking for your input on this presentation. So with that, unless there's any questions, get started. I'm happy to get going. It'd be about 20 minutes for me to get through my slides.
Do you want us to interrupt you with questions, or do you want us to wait till the end of your presentation and then have questions?
Let's just hold on to questions, because you never know if I might answer some of them along the way.
All right.
Do we have an hour or so? I'm not sure how long
you have an hour and a half, as much time as you need.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, if everybody's okay, then I'll just kind of go through the presentation, and then we'll just capture questions at the end.
Very good.
Okay. Let me get to sharing my screen.
You may have to click in the lower right-hand corner to go ahead and share. I always forget to do that. There we go.
Yeah, I gotta get back here, start the show. All right. Okay, so let's get started here then. This first slide or so, with our audiences, we're just trying to help define climate change, just to kind of set some basic framework for why we're doing this. And so, and I understand probably preaching to the choir on this issue a bit.
Hello.
But we're certainly showing some of the latest data that we have and why folks are doing. So the first on the left side there, if you were to take a 100-year average of the temperatures, the global surface temperatures, and then you basically looked at each year thereafter within that 100-year time frame, you kind of see that the blue represents those years where it was certainly cooler than average. And then somewhere around 1960, 1970s, when we start seeing where it kind of switches to above average temperatures. What's interesting about this is when you kind of marry that with the atmospheric concentrations of CO2. I have to kind of move your images here. I got some pictures here in the way. You can kind of see that the concentrations of CO2 have been steadily increasing over the years. So, there's been this correlation where folks see that there's a direct correlation between greenhouse gases and global surface temperatures. And, this is the basic science of it, is that, there's a certain amount of greenhouse gases that are beneficial to our life on this planet. And then there's the issue of that when you have too much of that in the atmosphere, then you're not able to release that radiant energy out, and therefore contributes to an overall global warming effect. And that kind of equates to what we call climate change, which is global. It's an engine, is the kind of way we think about it. There's lots of processes that go into it, but evidence seems to indicate that clearly, man-made use of carbon-based fuels is contributing to the problem. So when we look at the amount of greenhouse gases emitted, this is based, I think it was as of November of last year. You can kind of see on the global scale of things, China is #1 on greenhouse gas emissions. US is not far behind, but then you can kind of see where if we just looked at the Midwest and the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we're emitting here, we would actually fall into 5th place overall. So it's pretty significant what's going on here in the Midwest with the amount of emissions that we are generating. So we here in Kansas City obviously want to do our part. The next couple of slides here just kind of shows you how this is manifesting itself around our country particularly. And this is, of course, not unique to our country. There are lots of these effects happening across the globe. But in this particular case, you're looking at these billion-dollar weather issues that come up, these weather phenomenon and the costs of doing these things. And, we've had on average since 1980, somewhere in the order of about $3.1 billion disasters per year. However, if you look at just the last 3 years alone, that's kind of been up to about 18.7. So these types of climate disasters have been kind of picking up in frequency. And so this just kind of shows you through June of this year what's been logged so far. And we'll update this as we go along. This is kind of more similar types of data that's out there that's coming along, just kind of showing that these types of issues, whether it's flooding, whether it's storm events, drought conditions, they are becoming more prevalent. In the past year or so, we've seen a lot more pictures and stuff on Lake Mead. And it's, some of the stories, of course, people are finding, barrels and whatever, things are becoming more visible in these lakes as they're drying up because the demands on them are so much more, whether from the Western states or the demands on them are so great. And, you're going to see these types of things are popping up, these news stories, kind of one after the other. And a lot of these are Midwest. This particular one, of course, Colorado, you've got your wildfire issues. And, these things are not just Western state issues. You have air quality that can impact Kansas City from wildfires. And we've seen some of that even in the past year or so. So as you can see, we're starting to see more and more of these types of stories, flooding, drought issues. This particular one was in the St. Louis area fairly recently with the flooding that occurred there. This one kind of came about literally just before we went to our council to present the climate plan for adoption. And this was basically where studies from the East Coast that were looking at, what is the future projections for all parts of the country. Really, if you looked at where Kansas City fell on that map, we were smack dab in the middle of what they consider to be a hazardous heat zone. And so when you think about what this will do for the Kansas City area over the next several decades, a lot of folks try to kind of correlate us to the climate of Houston. So that's what we're looking to expect here. So, how do we prepare for that now in the event that we're not able to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions enough to make a difference? We need to start thinking about resilience and adaptation. So this is kind of that was some of the background of why we're doing what we're doing. We looked here locally here, what are the impacts here in Kansas City specifically? And for us, and this was part of our planning efforts, was doing a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. And when you looked at for Kansas City, and based on information provided by climatologists, and you overlaid that with census data information that we had on the socioeconomic conditions of the population, whether it was age or disability or economic information. You see for Kansas City, where heat is one of our big issues, increased flooding is another one. And so when you overlay some of those concerns with the socioeconomic stressors, you can see on this particular map, our districts 3 and districts 4 are going to take the brunt of some of those climate issues that we'll be dealing with over the next several decades. So kind of helps us kind of understand where our efforts need to be kind of focused when we talk about strategies or actions to build resiliency in the community. So as some of you can attest, and I know Jerry's online and he can say that climate action is not new for us in Kansas City here. We started an original climate protection plan back in 2006. Took a year or two to kind of go through that process, working with the community, various stakeholders to basically come up with a climate protection plan in 2008. So cutting edge for its time, those were not necessarily common across the country at that point, and certainly one of the first ones in the Midwest. So certainly something to be proud of. And it had a wide variety of mitigation strategies outlined in that. However, as we started seeing the effects of climate change here in Kansas City, our stakeholders here locally started really coming to the table, talking to City Council, and really wanted to see a revised, updated climate protection plan. And so in 2020, literally in the midst of COVID, just as that was just taking off, Council adopted resolution number 20005, and it directed city staff to basically develop a new climate protection and resilience plan. And within that, they directed us to be as equitable as possible in working with our stakeholders. So they went so far as to actually identify a wide variety and a fairly long list of partners and collaborators to try to reach out and connect with in the planning of this document. But also, besides just directing us to do the plan, they set new emission reduction targets for Kansas City. And so you can kind of see here, for the community in general, they set us to be carbon neutral by 2040, and then for city operations to be 2030, to be carbon neutral by 2030. And those are extremely aggressive. Obviously, you're familiar with probably the Paris Accord agreements, where 2050 is typically the year that folks are trying to align their goals with. But in Kansas City, Council, with input from the stakeholders, set it to be 2040 for the community and 2030 for city operations. So with that, we have a pretty heavy lift to get there. So what is in a climate plan? Well, essentially, there's today, compared to where we were in 2006, 2007, cities across the country have, many of them have taken on doing these climate planning efforts. There's lots of components that can go into them. At the end of the day, a climate plan essentially is a framework for, planning, measuring, and evaluating your reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. However, for us, we wanted to go further. And of course, I talked about getting into adaptation. So we of course want to focus on mitigation to some extent, but we need to start thinking about, what happens if Kansas City becomes like Houston, down the road. What does that mean for our workers? What does that mean for the community? Can the grid withstand the draw on it, or the loads? And so, those are the kinds of things we need to kind of be working on now, just to help build that resilience. And then sequestration, it was also brought into this, is how do we go above and beyond and try to capture some of this carbon, whether it's through tree plantings or new technologies to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So our plan tries to kind of capture all three of these particular elements. Now here in Kansas City, we kind of had the benefit of kind of an effort here regionally. There was a local organization here, Climate Action KC, that really, with the help of our Mid-American Regional Council, really kind of helped mobilize many of the elected officials in the bi-state area here in the region. And so they had already started doing a regional climate action plan. And so they kind of finished up their part of that, or that plan, about a year and a half before we started ours. So we kind of had the benefit to kind of look at that as a framework for how we would do ours. But we also knew that in Kansas City, we wanted to be specific to our city's residents' needs. So we took the overarching regional plan as a framework, and we dug in deeper and really wanted to really focus more so on equity than the regional plan did, at least to our opinion. So just to give you an idea, you manage what you measure. So we've done various greenhouse gas inventories here in Kansas City, and thanks to Jerry Schechter, and thanks Jerry for the work you did on some of these, along with our consultants that helped us crunch the numbers. But you can kind of see here where we started. We aligned our baseline with 2005, which is aligning with the Paris Accord. And we have numbers, our data that goes through 2019. So you can kind of see where we started was 11.3 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents. And since that point, we were able to reduce that down to 8.6, which that basically equates to about a 24% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over that time period for the community. And for city operations, it's around 26% reduction. So great start. However, if our goals are 2030 and 2040 for those two, our trajectory just isn't steep enough to get those goals. So the other thing I'd like to point out in this, if you're looking at this particular bar graph, is that you can kind of see that the red represents transportation. And then the teal color is the energy use from the residential sector. And then of course, you've got the darker colors representing commercial and industrial. So essentially, our greenhouse gas emissions are broken up about a third transportation, a third residential, and a third commercial, essentially. So we can kind of look at that a little bit closer if you're interested in the emissions by source. This kind of shows you that on the electricity side, we're still pretty heavy on the emissions from electricity, from the coal power burning, or the coal plants. And even though, Evergy here is our local investor-owned utility, their fuel blend is getting better. And it was attributed to our reductions in greenhouse gas emissions over those 14 or 15 years. But, we're still at about 46% of our emissions are from the electricity usage. And then you can kind of see the gasoline, natural gas, and diesel kind of make up the bulk of the other half. So, and this also kind of shows you how it's broken down, again, by residential, commercial, and industrial. So this kind of, again, helps us with some of our strategy planning and what actions we can consider taking. Now, when we did this planning exercise with the community, and as I said, we started this during COVID, which was no easy task, trying to organize meetings with the community, both virtually and in person. We felt it was very, very much important to bring equity into this conversation, to funnel things through an equity lens. We did that by bringing on a consultant that certainly helped us in that area. We also had a couple of folks that we hired as climate justice workers that literally went out into the community and met people where they were. So visited them at their homes, went to their community centers, and just asked them what their stories were. How was climate affecting them? What were their issues that they were dealing with? And a lot of these things were around energy burden. They're the high cost of energy. Some of the folks here in Kansas City are spending 15 to 20% of their income on utility bills. So when we started meeting with the community, and we met with various folks all across the city, we started with this commitment to equity, is kind of laying the groundwork as to at least, giving some basic guidelines of how we wanted the conversation to go. So you can kind of see, we kind of pulled these guiding equity principles that we borrowed from Brian Stevenson. But it was kind of, we reiterated them each time we had a meeting, we bring them up, and to consider a position, so to be open to new information, to trust the process. And a lot of folks, I would say, they really did, they stuck to this process, and really kind of tried to incorporate these principles into the way they offered suggestions into the plan. So with that, I just wanted to get that out there because it was a big, important part of our entire planning process. But at the end of the day, what we came up with, our plan, based on the input from all of our stakeholders in the community, was organized into 6 climate action areas. And you can kind of see them here. We cover mobility, energy supply, natural systems, homes and buildings, food, and waste. So with that, these 6 action areas are then further broken down into strategies. And so this particular slide shows you the 22 strategies that the community proposed that will help us not only reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but help build resilience in the community. And I just added some additional slides, so I wasn't sure how well this one would come out, especially when we're on the road show taking this places. So kind of separated each slide separately. So if you're interested in looking at the specific strategies, I have a slide for each of the action areas here. So it gives you I'll let you read through some of these. I don't need to read them to you, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of things that the community was proposing. Some really great ideas here. Now, within each of these strategies, and in this case, you got 5 strategies proposed around mobility. They're further broken down into specific actions. And so even though we have 22 strategies, overall, we have about 100 actions among those strategies. So they're broken down to very specific actions we can take. And so here's natural systems, of course, using natural systems to deal with our stormwater issues. Trees are a big strategy for us on heat island effect, and of course on the carbon sequestration side of things. So of course, here's probably something you're all very much interested in. Here is on the energy supply side, improving the grid stability, utility scale renewable energy, trying to improve the fuel blend. So lots of great strategies there. I would say that our Evergy was at the table on these, along with our Spire, our natural gas company. They were involved in these conversations, along with Sierra Club and many other stakeholders that came to the table. This is our homes and buildings. And so this is where we talked about, of course, energy code issues, weatherization issues, promoting equitable building decarbonization. So several actions we've taken there. We couldn't ignore food, of course, a lot of effort around urban agriculture, how we can produce food more locally to kind of reduce those emissions from the transportation, and so many other good benefits there. And then the last one, of course, waste and materials. How do we deal with our landfills? Our diversion rate here in Kansas City is not very good. I'll put that out there right now. So there's lots of work we need to do in trying to divert our waste materials out of the landfills. We're actually working on some composting programs right now at a much larger scale. So some work to be done there as well. So with that, I wanted to show you this. This is another way to look at our greenhouse gas emissions, our inventory. So again, you'll see 2005 is our baseline, and you can see that 11.3 million metric tons there. And you can kind of see we've been reducing. And then you can see at 2019, where we were there at about 8.3 or so. But what's interesting, you'll see 2020, we have 2020 data there that we're able to pull that. Well, that's COVID. So for a lot of folks, you kind of wonder, well, what did COVID do for our emissions, so globally and over, how did that look? So, there was definitely a measurable difference in reduction in emissions, and much of that was around mobility issues. I just mentioned that just because I think it's an interesting thing to look at. But what I really want you to focus on is the line that's marked business as usual projection. So that is where, if we continued as we are now, doing what we're doing based on population increase, that's where we would project greenhouse gas emissions to continue. Where we needed to get to be carbon neutral is down to the zero baseline here. And so what we did is we had our consultant pull out all of those strategies and actions that only dealt with mitigation, only dealt with reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And you can kind of see when you factor in those mobility strategies, the energy supply strategies, the homes and building strategies, we still fall short of our goal of carbon neutral by 11%. So that little green wedge in the bottom right corner of this graph is that 11% gap. So how do we cover that 11% gap? That's where we get into the carbon sequestration side of things. So plant those trees, maintain those trees, which is a big one. And what technologies can we expect into the future that might actually help us to capture that carbon? And that's one thing I'll put out now. I meant to mention it earlier. Our plan is a carbon neutral plan. There was a lot of discussion about zero carbon. Some folks pushed hard for us to put together a zero carbon plan. Well, we didn't feel that that was what was in the best interest of the community. There are still some folks that will need to rely on natural gas, whether for emergency purposes, whether we rely on renewable natural gas. We just didn't feel that we were going to put forth a zero carbon plan. We just didn't feel that that was in the best interest. So this is a carbon neutral plan. So even though we may have some sources of carbon, we're hoping that the technologies, those will offset some of those, small amounts of fossil fuels that are maybe still being used even down the road in 2040 or even after. So I just want to put that out there, that some folks were trying to say that this was a zero carbon plan, and it is not. It's a carbon neutral plan. And many cities across the country are doing that. And even at the federal level, things are aligned with carbon neutral, not zero carbon. All right, so what is in the plan? So when you have a chance, if you to look at the plan, what you're going to see, this is just the highlights. It's a framework for how we will meet our goals. It is a roadmap, and that is merely what it is. It's a roadmap of how we can reduce our emissions and we can build resilience in the community. Okay. The other thing is that the strategies are organized by area within the city. So we discovered when we did those meetings in Kansas City, we did, Kansas City has a Northland, north of the Missouri River. We've got a central area and then a Southland. And so when we met with the different groups, it was interesting that their concerns, their issues were slightly different. And so we decided when we were building this plan, we've got the basic plan, but then it's broken out by parts of the city. So if you're a Northlander, you can focus just on the Northland part of the plan and look at those strategies and actions that are proposed to see how that aligns with your mission. The plan also identifies key implementation partners. So a lot of folks that were involved in our planning process volunteered themselves to say, hey, we'll take the lead on this, on this particular action or this strategy, we'll take the lead, because the city can't do it all. There's just too much there. There's some things that the city can do. We're well suited for it, but there's lots of things that we are not well suited for it. We can kind of help support, but we should not be the ones to take the lead. So we have lots of key implementation partners, and those are identified in the plan. The plan is also organized into short-term actions, mid and long-term actions. So we wanted to know, what's the low-hanging fruit? What are those things that are minimal cost, minimal staff time that we can get to right away to kind of start in on this plan? Then we have the midterm and long-term. So those are more like the 3 to 5 year and 5 to 10 year strategies and actions. So the plan has that kind of built into it as well. And the last thing I'll mention is that these strategies and actions are not just about resilience. It's not just about mitigation. There are some co-benefits with this. So whether they're, let's talk about homes, healthy buildings, for example. You know, one of the co-benefits, of course, for focusing on that stuff is the health and well-being of those folks in those buildings. So the plan identifies what some of those co-benefits are, whether they're economic recovery benefits, whether it's an environmental justice issues that can be addressed by implementing that strategy or action. So we were really trying to identify those things that had those co-benefits there. So that's generally what's in the plan. Just as important is what is not in the plan. Now this was a big one on the literally the day or two that the plan was in front of council. It was touch and go, and some of you that were there saw what was going down. There was a lot of misinformation, and I'm going to put this out there, that this plan is not a mandate on businesses nor the residents of Kansas City. This plan was adopted by a resolution, not an ordinance, so it is not a law. It is a roadmap on how we get from where we are today to carbon neutral down the road. It offers a menu of strategies and actions, and they are not fully developed policies and procedures. Okay, those are to come later. So when folks were saying you know, there was a lot of talk about this plan, we're going to be shutting down the restaurants, we're going to be closing down the hibachis and going into people's homes and taking out their gas stoves and all that. That's not what's in the plan. Okay, so you know, the strategies, of course, with fossil fuels, we have to reduce. And so, you know, there are strategies in how we get there. But in our mid and long-term strategies or in our plan, there's still some talk about using the infrastructure related to natural gas, whether that's for hydrogen or other technologies, you know, so that's still in there to be considered. So I just want to make sure we get that. We're not going to be shutting down any restaurants because of their use of natural gas in this one. We're certainly going to encourage them, offer them incentives to consider other energy sources, and that's in the plan, but we do not have the authority. The state of Missouri preempts the city on anything that comes close to us mandating any particular fuel source here in Kansas City, and this plan does not do that. So with that, the other thing the plan does not do, it did not identify all the partners we need. We are discovering almost daily that there are still lots of folks that we need to connect with, that we need to collaborate with. So we are keeping track of those folks, getting their names and numbers, and looking forward to working with them collaboratively down the road. And lastly, fixed implementation strategies are not in the plan. They were suggested, but we did not do a feasibility study, an analysis on every one of these actions, these 97 actions that are in the plan. Much more work has to go into the analysis of those specifically. And that's kind of why this next slide, this is what we're thinking about doing, is that on specific strategies and actions in the plan, our intention is, when the city is taking the lead on these things, to work with partners, you know, whoever is best suited for whatever that strategy or action is, to build the policy, to build the program with people at the table. And besides building the policy and the program, if it is going to affect a certain group of people, then we need to identify what the resources are to help them to comply and or to implement the program. So we need to figure out those tools and resources, and then take it to council for their adoption, and then implement. So this is just a rough kind of what that implementation process will look like for a good majority of those 97 or so actions that are in the plan. And that's, as we meet with the community and we talk about certain actions, it's quite conceivable we determine it's not feasible. This particular action will not work. And so it is possible one may get abandoned, or it might morph into something that we didn't foresee during this particular planning process. So it is adaptable as the plan goes. We are not keeping it, you know, saying that it's not going to be a stagnant plan. It's not set in stone. It is adaptable. All right. So how can you help? Basically, I encourage you. Our plan, it's on the city's website. You can access it there, and all the supplemental documents. Everything from the entire planning process is there. Everybody's comments were captured. They were kept there for people to reference. But read the plan. And then for your organization to be involved, look at what your interests are. What are your goals? And how does that align with the plan? And that's where we want to, collaborate with you and look at, what grant opportunities can we partner with you on these things. So spread the word, share your expertise. There's the website there if you want to get emails that we'll be sending out. We haven't started it yet, but we're hoping to send out like a quarterly update to kind of keep everybody informed on what we're doing. We're also working on a dashboard. So we'll actually be able to show folks of the strategies and actions that are in plan, what % of those are complete, or where are we in that process. So we're kind of, there's lots of vendors out there that provide dashboards. So we've been kind of perusing some of those right now. So, but get involved and reach out. So this is my slide here. This is my contact information. I have a sustainability manager that is also very integral to this plan as well. So Laura Ish is my manager helping on this implementation. And then we've just hired a new person. So Jerry Schechter, when he retired and left us, left a vacant position. And so Kelly Herman is Jerry's replacement with my staff. So we have kind of repurposed that position to kind of focus more on being a direct contact with the community. So her title, therefore, is Sustainable Communities Coordinator. So she'll be our liaison to the community so that we continue to talk to them, find out what their needs are, what do they need to help support them as, in terms of our climate action plan. All right, so I think that is it. I'm going to stop sharing and catch my breath and turn it over to questions, I suppose.
I suppose I should jump in. I was supposed to be with you at the beginning there. This is Ken, and technical glitch got messed up. Excellent presentation, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Boy, it seems like when you get to the heart of what you're trying to accomplish, Jesus, it's really a mouthful, and now you've got to start chewing it. It just seems like a huge task, and I'm sure Jerry felt this way too. So how are you coping with the enormity of the scope of this thing?
Yeah, so after the plan was adopted in August, I think we took a week off completely where we were sort of, I mean, it seemed like it was a battle to get it through council. And at the end of the day, it actually passed with 11 votes in favor, 1 vote against, and 1 abstained, as I recall, something along those lines. And we were pretty exhausted. It was a very difficult, process at the end with a lot of the misinformation and trying to get council. I mean, they were trying to revise the plan to something totally different. But at the end of the day, we've recovered. We feel rejuvenated. The city followed shortly thereafter with the energy code, the 2021 energy code, and that was the test for the council. It's like they first approved the plan. Then the question is, are you going to follow through with what the plan said on the energy code? Because in the plan, it does talk about approving the most current energy code feasible. Well, 21 is out there, residential, commercial, and that's what we were most interested in seeing is what was council going to do? Because if they voted against the 21 code, then for us, the whole voting on the climate plan would have been for naught. It's like you don't follow through on your commitments. But at the end of the day, they came through. And I honestly did not know. I was in the council chambers, had no idea which way that was going to go right to the very end. And even that, I think that one didn't pass quite as much. It was like 9 votes for it. there were 4 votes against it, and they were all Northland councilmen that were mostly concerned about all the building in Kansas City's in the Northland. And so they were more concerned about how it was going to affect the construction in the Northland. So those were the 4 no votes. But that, I guess my point here, Craig, is that really brought a lot of energy to our office and to people in the community. And, you know, people saw that and said, wait a second, council actually followed through with a commitment to what was in the plan. So now we're all excited. Everybody's looking at grant opportunities. We're looking at right now, we've got 12 different grant opportunities that we're working with various groups in Kansas City on food policy, on energy efficiency projects, all kinds of things. So all kinds of energy just took off. And so bringing a new person on, we've got another one joining us next month. In my budget request for next fiscal year, I got 2 positions I'm asking for, just because it can seem overwhelming. My role, I think, with my staff is to try to keep everybody sort of, you know, not to overcommit. You know, we're going to do our best to collaborate, work with as many people. But we've been telling people, you know, if you see a grant opportunity, don't send it to us and say, have us do the research on it. Investigate it yourself. If you see that that's going to work and you're a good partner for this, we'll partner with you. We'll write you letters of support. We'll be there at the table. But we just can't process all of the stuff going on right now. It's just too much. So we're really asking our partners, and I should mention, and I didn't do a very good job of it, we had a climate protection steering committee members appointed by the mayor that did a phenomenal job of, you know, just helping us steer the course. They processed a lot of these actions and strategies that were being proposed. So we've leaned on them quite a bit as well, you know, and we didn't necessarily agree with them all the time, and we had some pushback here and there, but it was a group effort. It was not just my office, it was the community, it was the steering committee, and at the end of the day, the council came through. So yeah, I think we're excited about the way things are going so far. Yeah, I've not seen this kind of energy for a while. Okay, Marion?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, is there any particular consideration being given to solar panels? My church is interested in getting solar panels, Westport Presbyterian. And we heard something about going together with other institutions in the area and making a group proposal. What could you tell me about that, and who would I get in touch with?
So, you know, and I think you're referring to a program that it was Solarize Kansas City. It was our bulk purchase program that we set up here in the metropolitan area. And we, and I talked, I think it was with Ken, we talked about this a little bit. I think our wires got crossed back when we started the Solarize Kansas City program, you know, back in January, February of this year. I did reach out through email and trying to connect with this group to see how you might be able to plug into that overall program and help us build that out. And I think our wires we just didn't connect on that. So I kind of apologize for that. You know, that probably should tried some phone calls or try, you know, get that connection set up more so. But that being the case, we did launch in June for a bulk purchase program. It was open for residential and commercial and nonprofit organizations. So we had a website. You could go on to that website and you would just sign up for basically a free estimate. And so we did all the contracting. We had a US Sun Solar was the organization that won the bid. And the way the contract was set up is that as we had people contract for solar, the more people that contracted for solar would drop us into lower tiered pricing. And unfortunately, unless your organization enrolled by the end of October, we had it open from June to the end of October. If you signed up on the website, then you still have an opportunity to do the contracting. That isn't doesn't have to be done until March of next year for nonprofits and commercial. If your organization did not get in and complete the enrollment form, then you'll probably have to wait until the next iteration of this particular bulk purchase program. But essentially, through this program, we were able to get the cost down about 25% over MSRP pricing on solar installations. So, yeah, we've got, I think we're approaching almost 3/4 of a meg of capacity of solar on the residential side. And on the commercial nonprofit, wasn't quite as good. We're still, and they have until March to contract. So we'll see what we get between now and March of next year. But, you know, we've got the Kansas City Public Library System is doing solar on their buildings. I think we've got 1 or 2 nonprofits also. So I don't know if you know that they enrolled or not. If you shoot me an email, I can check to see if they enrolled. And therefore I can follow up and see what the cost estimate was, and we can talk about it further.
Okay.
I ought to jump in there again. I think that there was some confusion back when, but you don't have to apologize for that, because I take part of that. I'm not sure what happened. It was just an odd time. We were trying to figure out what was happening, who was doing what, and it fell through the cracks.
Yeah. No,
So,
I mean,
very sorry about that.
And I think Jerry was the one that proposed that you might have been a great partner for that. And, you know, literally this was in partnership with Rocky Mountain Institute. So they had approached the city and said, hey, would you be interested in doing this bulk purchase program for solar in your area? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, and these are being done all around the country. So we're not the first. We're part of a second cohort of cities, including Oklahoma and Tulsa, to do this. I think everybody kind of watched to see how it was going here in Kansas City. I think everybody's pretty happy with how it's going. We even offered a low income component to this. So we received funding to fund about 15 solar installations for low income families, about 4 kilowatt systems, you know, not anything large, but enough to cut their cost in half, maybe, on the electric bills. Okay. Erin, I'll go with Erin.
Hi, well, I'm Tracy. I think I'm going to ask my question first. I have kind of a 3-part question that I should probably preface by saying these are all native plant questions. That we have a couple native plant growers here on the call tonight. Erin and I are with So Wild Natives, and I see Brent there with Botanical Belongings, formerly Happy Apple, there in Tonganoxie, Kansas. But I was wondering if the city has any plans to put in a program similar to like the Contain the Rain program in in Johnson County, Kansas, to help reimburse homeowners to get basically native plants to help with water issue, but also this would help meet the carbon sequestration problem. You know, we talk about trees for carbon sequestration, but prairie plants are also a huge benefit to both carbon sequestration as well as water retention. So that's my first question. The second one is on changes to lawn restrictions, kind of tied to that. Yeah, I guess we'll start. My third question is, I don't know if there's been really any funding for, I think they're calling it the CAP, basically the roof that's supposed to go over 470 to bridge down, or 670 to bridge downtown to Midtown, kind of. But I don't know what the talks are on that. But I also wonder if there's talks on having that be a green roof with native plants, which I can list off a billion different benefits for the city. But those are my 3 questions on that.
Okay, so I'm not going to be able to answer the first one so much. I mean, we are focusing on native plants in regards to homeowners. So we unfortunately have not been very favorable towards those folks that have native plants in terms of enforcement on our codes, nuisance codes particularly. So I started working with a group of individuals from various organizations here in Kansas City, including Deep Roots and others, that are helping me draft new codes to be favorable towards, let's call it managed landscapes. That's, I think, what we're kind of working with. And so what does that look like for our code inspectors? So when they show up, you can have native plantings and they're not going to write you a ticket for it, you know, if they exceed 12 inches in height or whatever. So this group, they started working on this back in January of this year. We worked on it for a few months. We started putting together a draft of that. And then I have to admit, because I was short on staffing, we had to table it so we can get the climate plan finished and done. And now we're getting back to it now. We want to have a new ordinance in place before the next season. And we need to get training in place and, of course, education outreach for the community. But definitely native plantings is part of that. And we want to be a little bit more friendly towards those folks that want to have that. And of course, reducing our turf grasses where possible. So I like the first thing that you mentioned there. And you know, the group that I'm working with has mentioned, I think they've mentioned something along those lines. Our first priority is changing the code. And then from that, we're going to kind of go further than that. So I think we're starting with the basics and then we'll tackle the first one. The cap, that's still preliminary for the 670. And it, you know, there's a lot going on right now downtown. I mean, there's a lot of proposals. You may have heard about the Broadway Bridge.
Hello?
There may be a Broadway Bridge issue.
Hello?
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, yeah. So and then of course, you may have seen that there's new conversations around the baseball park being moved downtown. But that particular cover for 670, it's still on the table. It's a big dollar amount. They're looking for federal funding on that. So it's still way too early to talk about specifics on that. But that's part of my role with that, is in these conversations as they progress further down, you know, how do we incorporate sustainable elements to those projects and natives. You know, we've got in-house support for it, and that's why they're wanting us to change the ordinance. That's an in-house effort to do that. And I think the city manager would be totally supportive of continuing that on any further projects that we've got going on. But yeah, that cover, it's still way too preliminary for that.
Okay. And we have a hand raised.
Hi, yeah. Hi everyone. Let me go ahead and put my video. I have terrible lighting here, so I tend to turn it off. Andy, thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciate you kind of breaking it down. I do remember being part of some of those meetings prior, and then being able to attend in person when it had passed. And everyone, my name is Atenas Mena. I'm with Clean Air now, but I'm also a resident of Kansas City. And I guess my concern, and I just want to raise it just because I know that this is still a plan that, like you mentioned, it can be modified and adapted to what the community needs. But some of the concerns that we as a community organization that advocates for environmental justice were bringing up was that community members in the low-income BIPOC communities, like for example, Indian Mound, that's right next to the coal plant, they're already experiencing like climate change effects, but also like the cumulative impacts of air pollution on top of all of the social determinants that can affect their health. And we were concerned that we didn't see more language around how we're going to prioritize overburdened communities or environmental justice communities. For one, how how this plan could work to identify with the community, what that would look like in Kansas City. And then especially, these are the same communities that are experiencing the greatest energy burden. They're the ones that are also more at risk from industries that may have accidents like chemical spills. We've been advocating nationally for risk management plans to be better enforced, and then also have a plan on how it's going to be communicated with communities so they can know what to do. And with more extreme weather events, we're going to see more possible accidents that could occur from it. So I'd love to hear your perspective and opinion of how your plan to work with the community to address some of these concerns, and how we're going to work collectively to prioritize already the overburdened communities. And it was kind of it felt like a punch in the gut when Evergy isn't willing to really work with us to even, like, I know, shutting down the coal plant, because I wouldn't want a coal plant in my neighborhood. I don't want to have my kids breathing that every day, right? But I wish that was more incorporated in like a climate action plan, is seeing that climate justice piece too.
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is, since the adoption of the plan, just around the power plant issue that you're talking about, it may not be well known or not, but the city did kind of go to the Public Service Commission and submit, I forget the exact terminology, but we did put in a request to force Evergy to run modeling on closing the power plant by 2025. So we just, I think, recently saw that that has been approved, that the Public Service Commission is following up with that and is going to require that that modeling be done by Evergy. And there was a whole list of other requirements and things we wanted to be seen done, be done by Evergy, and to, of course, share that in a transparent way with the community and with the city, so that we can kind of continue that topic about closing the plant by 2025. So just wanted to make mention that that has happened. We did that with Evergy, and then we had a separate topic, of course, with the rate increase that Missouri or Spire was proposing. We intervened on that as well. It's not, there's good news to come on that. I don't know if you've heard or not, but folks will see there will be what was being proposed by Spire in terms of rate increase will be not quite what they asked for. So there's good news in that regard to come. So stay tuned on that. I'm not going to be the one to share that quite yet with everybody, but I think the community coming out to speak about the Spire rate increase was very instrumental in what the outcome will be with what the Public Service Commission is going to put on in terms of that rate case. But to get to your environmental justice issue, if you remember in the planning process, one of the things that came out of that, and it was a recommendation that was run through our steering committee, was kind of a need for a environmental justice committee. And so we're still committed to doing that. We've been kind of talking about how do we put that together, whether we run that with an ordinance through council with the mayor to do the appointments, or whether there's another avenue to put that committee together. We want to make sure we provide some type of stipends or payment for participating on that particular committee. But we feel that that committee will be instrumental for us on staff, as well as the steering committee, to help us prioritize those strategies and actions. So we haven't got to that quite yet. We've had some preliminary conversations. We've got some dollars, some funding set aside to do it. It's just, as was mentioned, there's a lot going on right now. We're trying not to miss out on grant opportunities, so we're working on getting that aligned. We have not forgotten about the Environmental Justice Committee that we want to do with this. It's just, we're trying in-house to prioritize things so we don't miss out on any funding opportunities right now. But I assure you that we'll be probably in the new year here, first part of the first quarter of the new year, we'll have conversations with our steering committee about how we go about setting up this climate justice subcommittee, if we want to call it that, to help us steer the future actions of implementing the plan.
Any
So I
other
hope that
questions?
helps a little bit.
More questions? Well, I've got one. How do you feel Kansas City is doing relative to other municipalities in the area
In
or the
terms
United
of,
States?
yeah, that's a good question. So I think that in the Midwest, we're doing pretty well. I mean, Jerry knows this. We used to make Jerry do a lot of our reporting with various organizations on how we're doing. I'm sure he misses doing those reporting efforts. And anytime you want to get back into doing that, let me know. But, there's these organizations that, collect data on how cities are doing. It's called CDP or Climate Disclosure Project. They look at it, it's from a global perspective, how cities are doing based on the data that they provide. And we're actually tomorrow, I think, expecting to see how Kansas City fares. And we've had some preliminary chats with that group, and they were pleasantly surprised about what they saw Kansas City has accomplished over the past year or two. So, typically in years past, we've had letter grades. I don't know, Jerry has a better grasp of what we may have scored in the past. But I think we're knocking on the door of maybe an A- grade, which is really good for Kansas City. So
Andy, the last one I was involved in was a B+.
That's good. So yeah, I think we're going to be bumping up a notch. So I think in the Midwest, I put us up against any city in the Midwest. And, part of that, it's hard, I try to compare ourselves to other cities too much because I can look at Denver, for example, and, they're doing great things in Denver, but then again, they've got a climate tax, they've got $20 million. They've got a staff of 10, 15 people that are all devoted to sustainability and various climate activities. And there's a few other cities like that that are just, well stacked and have the resources. For us, I've got a $1 million budget, and most of that is in staffing. That's not there's not a lot extra there for programs or anything else. And as I said, I've got 3-4 people that work on climate actions and sustainability. And I've got a budget request in for our next budget year for 2 more, and we'll see how it goes. But I think we're small, but we're doing some great things. And so I'm, compared to St. Louis, I think we're doing great. Nationally, sure, there's some cities, New York City, Chicago, they've got some really great programs going on, and we sort of look at them, Boston, they've got really great programs, and we kind of try to look at what they've done and try to mold it to the Midwest a little bit, what our needs are. So, I think we're competitive. Could be better if I had more resources. Reality is we don't see that we're ever going to get a climate tax here locally, not anytime soon, in the current political environment we're in. So we're just doing what we can do.
Between the municipalities, do you think there's enough sharing of ideas and good winning strategies going on?
Yeah, there's a network that we're part of. It's the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. We are very much plugged into that group. So there are sustainability directors similar to myself and their staffs that are connected by this organization across the country. And that's partly what we do is if I have a question about something, I can go to that network and I just type my question in. It says, can anybody provide me a plan on this? And other cities will start sending you stuff, so we have templates or examples. I mean, we love to kind of take something and make it our own. It saves time, effort to some extent. But, you know, I know Jerry, it was connected to him. I'm connected to him. And even today we were online, we're looking at some stuff that Ann Arbor's doing, and we're like, hey, that's a great idea. We might take that for ourselves here, you know. So that's the primary, that's one of them. There's other connections we have in the Midwest that we're linked up with. We recently signed up, it's called the Midwest Climate Collaborative. And that is us, St. Louis, and also educational institutions. So like the Missouri, University of Missouri system, Washington University, and a few other cities and colleges, universities. We joined them last year, and you know, we're working on urban heat island and tree canopy issues. And what's cool about that particular connection is that we have the universities that science aspect of it. They're looking for projects to do. They're looking for research to do. And we're like, hey, this is what we want to do. Can you figure this out? And then we'll figure out the program part of it. So this collaborative has really been pretty good for us in the past year. And that's, you know, there's hardly any cost to participate in that. But yet it's been a great, you know, because these cities all are sort of doing similar things. So working together, we're solving the problems together.
Great. Aaron and Tracy, I think you have a question.
Yeah, Andy, I work with Scott Clam, so he kind of keeps me up to date on some of the work you guys are doing. So yeah, I really appreciate all this great work in the presentation today. Can you help me understand, you know, like I see some of the different reduction goals. What do you see as the things that are ultimately driving those if there's not really a budget for Kansas City-based rebates, or and if mandates aren't really a thing? Do you just see the price of energy going up and the interest is the main driver here? Or what do you feel like are the levers that this plan is pulling to drive people to make changes?
Yeah, so like I said, each of these actions will need to be fleshed out in more detail. You know, so what's the carrot that's going to drive those particular strategies and actions? You know, so those things that would, let's say, improve the fuel blend, you know, with Evergy, you know, that's where we intervene, we get involved with their planning processes. That's where we're trying to do that. But on the other side of things, you know, maybe there's some rebate programs, things to incentivize folks to consider solar, or, you know, next year we're talking about heat pumps, for example. So, you know, how do we provide some type of incentive to do a heat pump bulk purchase program, for example? So folks might consider doing that. And that's why, you know, for us, finding the funding for that is instrumental as well. So that's why we're monitoring all these different opportunities under the IRA and the infrastructure bill, and there's even stuff under the farm bill that we can maybe access. So we're sort of in a holding pattern because the federal government hasn't necessarily put out a lot of guidance on some of this stuff yet. You know, you see the dollar amounts, but they haven't started releasing the details yet. The general guidelines, brushstrokes in the laws that we can see how we think we can use that money. But I think a lot of it's going to be incentive programs. You know, I definitely, I know Jerry was involved with a revolving loan fund type program in Energy Works KC. I'm not sure we're going to want to do that again, but there's maybe other things. You know, the city is interested in housing. Housing is an issue for the city, and so they're looking at, well, how do we couple affordable housing with energy efficiency and weatherization issues? So, you know, how can we find the funding to kind of help many of these different things? So yeah, it's not an easy answer on that, but I think working with, you know, the stakeholders and the you know, various groups here, we're hoping to figure out how to implement some of this stuff where we can kind of nudge people. And in some cases, when it comes to the utilities, that's a different animal, and that's kind of why we started getting involved with it, this intervention process. And you know, we're looking at trying to bring on an attorney that would be on contract with us, that's all they'll do for us is, you know, look for those opportunities where we can kind of intervene and represent the community at the table on rating case increases or their integrated resource planning processes at the utilities. So yeah, I don't know if that gave you a direct answer to that, but there's just some thoughts I had about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Very good. Anything else? Any other questions before we say goodnight?
Well, I'd like to get in here for a second. I think from this future, well, from this point forward, we'll try not to ever have a disconnect between what you guys are doing and what we're doing. So I think if you have something coming up that you would like for us to support, just let us know. We'll run it by the board and probably never let something like that happen again. So I think it's very impressive what you guys are doing. I worked with the city of Independence. I was their energy administrator for 10 years. And then I went work for BPU when they did all the stuff over there. So I ran both the rebate programs for both places. And it's hard to get anything done. It's hard to believe this is the same Kansas City that I was trying to deal with 20 years ago. So it's nice to see cities. I see what Kansas City's doing. It's come around amazingly to me. So I guess kudos to what you've been doing, the work you've been doing. Getting the 2021 code in place is a major achievement. I didn't think it was going to happen. Every time you try to do anything with a code, you got a line of people who want to fight it for whatever reason, and half the time they don't even know what they're fighting. They don't want change. So
Right.
really, really good stuff you're doing.
No, and I appreciate it. And I certainly take very little, if any, credit to any of this. It's really came down to our council, our stakeholders, our steering committee, the community in general. They come out in droves. I couldn't be happier with that kind of support. I'm just trying to, it's like herding cats. I'm trying my best. There's so many people want to do so many different things. We want to be supportive, but I'm also trying not to overcommit our resources to the point where my staff just will totally just explode. So we're doing what we can do, and I'm happy that you see positive change, and I am too. And we just keep on plugging away at this, and we're hopefully have more wins to come. Sometimes I think we may not have a win or two, but we just will pivot. We'll do what we can do. So that's why I'm here.
Well,
Jerry?
very excellent. Thanks.
Jerry?
Yeah, I think everybody talking about things going to city council in support of what the intent is in the plan. You should be aware that there is a new addition to the city codes that has been proposed. It's been worked on for the last 3 years. The number is 88-424. It's titled Tree Preservation and Protection. It is, from what I've been told, it was being sponsored by the mayor. So it's likely already been submitted to city council, at least for their first review and reaction. So if you're interested in what the city's proposal for dealing with trees in a broad sense, and then also the city's urban forest master plan, which was adopted, what, Andy, 2 years ago, something like that?
2018.
The combination of those two, you should be interested in if you're interested in the city's response to trees. And we're looking at Kansas City, Missouri is looking at the loss of about 1 million trees from, we've got a mature tree canopy here, and there's also the ash tree borer that's going to destroy a lot of trees. It's in process now of destroying a lot of trees. Anyway, if you're interested, that's the new code number for action with regard to trees.
Well, Jerry, did you make it to the city plan commission yesterday?
No.
Yeah, so that's where that tree preservation ordinance went first, is in front of the city plan commission.
Okay.
And so the developers had their opportunity to get their say in on it. So We'll see.
I'm sure the knives were out.
Oh, yes, yeah. I mean, and you know, what was interesting in their rebuttal to the tree preservation ordinance, they brought up the energy code. You know, you're adding $30,000 to the cost of a home. Now we're talking about adding cost for trees, you know, it's like, okay. So that
Actually, the biggest cost for trees for developers is if they tear them down. It's a disincentive to tearing down trees.
yeah.
So
So
anyway, I wanted people to know that that was happening also.
yeah, if you're interested in that topic, stay tuned because it will go to city council, assuming it doesn't get derailed before then. But yeah, it should go soon.
We will put the URL for the climate plan, www.kcmo.gov/climate. We'll put that when we put the link to the website or to the program, to the Zoom session. We will include that in the narrative. I'm sure Ken will do that for us, where we give them the URL to the climate plan.
Yep.
Well, I'm proud of what you guys are doing, even though I no longer reside in the metropolitan area. But it's heartening to see the effort that you guys are putting out.
Well, thank you again for having me. I'm happy to share this, and I certainly encourage your group to take a look at the plan. If there's something that really strikes you as an opportunity to get involved, we'd be happy to connect and work with you on a project. And in the future, as we might do another solar project like Solarize, I'll be sure to reach out and we'll connect on that for sure. But if there's any other projects that you think you might want to do, let us know. We're open to suggestions.
I'm sure we'll discuss it at our next board meeting.
Yeah,
Cool.
sure will.
Well, thanks again, Andy.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
And I will bid you all fare thee well.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.